I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
Hello and good morning. It's Tuesday, October the 22nd. I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London.
And I'm Pauline Chu at CNN Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today. The U.S. is about to release its monthly jobs report, but investors searching for direction may not get it.
We assess the damage done so far in Australia as bushfires continue to burn out of control.
And new details emerge, shedding light on a near collision between two airplanes a few months ago.
But first, let's have a look at the top world news stories that we're following for you here at CNN this hour. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have been saying that the US may have violated international law when it used unmanned drones to attack targets in Pakistan and Yemen. They say that some of the strikes amount to war crimes. In a report released today, Human Rights Watch cites the killing of a grandmother and 18 labourers. Both groups are calling for an impartial investigation into what went on. 2 people are dead and 2 wounded after the latest US school shooting. Police say that a gunman at a middle school in Nevada was a student. Investigators say that he killed himself after killing a teacher who tried to stop him shooting. A worldwide search is underway for the parents of a young girl found living within a Roma community in Greece. A couple have been charged with abducting the little girl, known only so far as Maria. They say that they adopted the child from her mother.
Well, Nina, back to business news now. It's nearly 3 weeks late, but in a few hours, the U.S. is finally releasing one of its most closely watched reports on the economy, the monthly jobs numbers. Analysts expect it to say about 183,000 jobs were created in the month of September. Now, we usually get these figures just a few days after the end of the month, but a lot, of course, has happened since September turned into October. The government was partially shut down for 16 days. The bureau that tracks the job market sent everyone home except for 3 employees. So the numbers that we get today will already be somewhat dated. But the U.S. Federal Reserve and investors, too, are still eager to see what they say. The Fed meets next week, and it'll be coming back to this question. Is now the time to taper? In other words, reduce its monthly stimulus spending. The financial markets have got a lot riding on that decision. So let's bring in Andrew Sullivan of Kim Eng Securities. He's Director of Sales Trading and joins us here in our Hong Kong studios. So, Andrew, great to see you. Thank you for coming in again. What number do you expect to see, and how much weight will you actually put on it, considering that this jobs number will be late and considering that there was a government shutdown between then and now?
Well, that's it. I mean, it's rather dated information. I mean, it's going to be around that 180,000. I think people will probably be looking more at the unemployment percentage, 7.3. That's the question really the market's asking is it staying at that sort of level because people are dropping out of the job market completely? Or is it because they're really finding jobs? Because realistically, the US has to create around 200,000 jobs a month, to keep up with just natural growth in the society.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you have to peel back the layers and to see if people are dropping out, or to see if there is a huge amount that's underemployed. In other words, people who are just working part-time, but they really want a full-time job. Now, what will the Fed be looking at, and what do you think they will decide if, let's just say, it is about 183,000 jobs?
Well, I mean, we know that last time it was a very tight call as to whether they were going to taper or not, and they've rather tied themselves to the unemployment number. So if it stays around that 7.3, again, they've got another opportunity to taper if they want to. I suspect that they probably won't, but it would be quite a good, exercise for them just to do the nominal tapering, because that's where the market lost confidence with them last time. So the market's either going to look for more information out of the Fed as to why it's not tapering, or for them to make a gesture of tapering. And then at the next meeting in December, they can always reverse that, which would be in line with what Bernanke has said, that this is a two-way street. If the numbers don't continue to do well, then he will bring or phase back the tapering and go back to the bond.
But don't you think that will send the markets mixed messages if they nominally taper and then they go back and then they kick up the stimulus again? Because we can expect that the October jobs numbers may not be looking so good because of the effect that the shutdown has had on the economy. So wouldn't the Fed just wait until next year, wait until after this whole debt ceiling debate and the government shutdown debate ends in January and February?
Well, I think there's 2 points here. I mean, we know tapering is going to happen, it's just a matter of when. The markets are always very nervous about what's the effect going to be. So doing it now is not such a bad thing. The October numbers are going to be, skewed anyway, because that census was supposed to start on the 14th. The government was shut down at that point, so that's not going to really happen. So there's going to be a hole in the data anyway. So that gives them a good excuse to play around at this time, really. But I think it would also show the markets that they can taper and the world's not going to end. And that's the important thing. The market just doesn't know what's going to happen. And it needs that little bit of confidence, and this could be the opportunity for the Fed to really step in. Plus the fact that come December we might see that the shutdown hasn't had a marked effect on the economy. That we could see, the improving sentiment now that they have kicked that debt ceiling down the road a bit further, and that that brings us into the earnings side. And are we seeing companies really, starting to see real good end demand?
And let's talk about earnings, because we saw the S&P 500 hit another record high yesterday off of strong earnings. What trend are you seeing? Are you seeing companies pull in more profits because of cost cutting or because of actual growth and investment?
Well, I think the growth and investment side is still very tepid, to be frank. I mean, GE had very good numbers, but a lot of that was because their cost-cutting exercise was running ahead of schedule. So that made their numbers look very good, although they did cite, good global demand, which was improving. So that's a positive sign. But again, within the US itself, it's back to, people are still very cautious. We're coming at a very slow recovery, which is unusual for the US. The consumer isn't out there spending. And so, we saw with McDonald's the numbers met, but, there wasn't the revenue growth there that people were expecting, and hence the shares got turned down, really.
And that's the frustrating catch-22 in the U.S. economy. When people are feeling cautious, they're not spending, so of course companies aren't investing and they're not hiring. Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Sullivan from Kim Eng Securities joining us with a preview of the numbers and also of earnings season. So some good perspective there. Nina.
Yeah, stock markets here ahead of that US jobs report where I am in London, Pauline, and especially around the European continent, currently hovering, would you believe it, near 5-year highs. London FTSE 100, this market here, as you can see, is putting on some anemic gains in today's session, but it could be on course, if you take a look at the monthly figure here, on course for its 9th straight day worth of gains. That's the last part of the chart here. Obviously, things have been affected throughout the course of October and September by the political impasse in the United States. France markets down around about 1/10 of 1%. Nothing to write home about for the etc. DAX either in Frankfurt. Second day in a row that we've seen the Eurozone markets fall, whereas the other two that are outside of the Eurozone rising. But of course, a lot of what happens on these markets will depend later on the US jobs numbers, what they look like. But as you and I know, Pauline, things will be slightly skewed by the government shutdown.
Yeah, and we are going to get those jobs numbers in about 4.5 hours from now, so investors certainly looking forward to that. In the meantime, here in the Asia-Pacific region, Nina, we ended with a mixed picture. Now, housing data out of China pushed the composite and the Hang Seng lower. New home prices in more than 60 major cities in China rose again, and in fact, in the major cities of Beijing, they rose 16% from a year earlier and 17% in Shanghai from a year earlier. So this underscores the concern about the housing bubble, and it shows that the government's attempts to rein in the housing market are not working quite as well as they would like them to. These are housing curbs such as higher down payments and bans on second and third home loans. Now, there is also speculation that, let's take a look at the other markets here. There's speculation that the government will impose tighter curbs in the housing market there. And now let's take a look at Sydney. It was up by 0.4 of 1%. It rose to a fresh 5-year high there, Nina.
Well, Monday's session, Pauline, was fairly quiet on Wall Street. The S&P 500 opening at a record high, but it did come back down after the open and sort of fizzled out by the time markets closed. Investors cautiously awaited more details on corporate earnings. Also, as we were saying before, that latest jobs data for the month of September. Several are still trying to assess the full damage caused by the US government shutdown. Several investors, that is. Well, a housing market report out on Monday showed that existing home sales did drop by nearly 2% last month, and also Netflix was another big stock that moved on the markets. Its shares saw some pretty big movement after the company released its third quarter earnings after the close. The online video streaming service saw, and this is the crucial bit here, among its figures, a jump of 10% in after-hours trading because its number of users soared dramatically during the period. Well, coming up next on World Business Today, somewhere in all that haze is the Chinese city of Harbin. We'll tell you about what's causing the severe pollution there and also what the economic effects of what's going on will be.
Republic of Youth, Republic of Beauty, the Republic of Kosovo.
CNN's original series, Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, South Africa. Can a country once torn apart by racial division bring communities back together?
Are these good times for South Africa?
South Africans say yes.
I think it's one of the most mixed societies I've ever seen.
When you look at what's happened here, it's hard to not look at South Africa as a beacon of some kind of hope.
Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, South Africa, only on CNN. This week on Inside Africa.
Do you ever consider when you're on the road that the tyres on which you're riding could have originated right here in Africa? I'm Errol Barnett, Inside Africa, and this week's show is all about rubber and the process of transformation, taking it from a seed in the ground to a wheel on the road.
Inside Africa, Wednesday only on CNN. In association with Zenith Bank. Go inside the world of horse racing with CNN's Winning Post this month.
We're in Paris for the most sought-after prize on the racing calendar, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe.
Winning Post, Thursday on CNN, in association with Longines. Get an insider's view of the world's leading transportation hubs with The Gateway. This month, we're headed to Hong Kong to see how this city has established itself as the channel to China.
The number of passengers who, want to go outbound is clearly large and growing.
Whether it's by plane or train, or the sea or the road, see how Hong Kong is expanding and reinventing itself to make sure it's the ultimate connection to the mainland. That's this month on The Gateway, only on CNN, in association with Russian Railways.
Welcome back to World Business Today. There have been some major road accidents in northeastern China. The cause, a super smog that has blanketed the city of Harbin for several days now. You can barely see what's happening through all of this haze. Visibility downtown was reduced to just 50 meters on Monday. Schools were shut, flights were canceled, and highways closed. The UN recently said outdoor air pollution is now a leading environmental cause of cancer. And pollution in Harbin is 40 times higher, 40 times, than the international safety standard. This current reading is classified as very unhealthy. Now, this will most likely have an impact on China's economy. In fact, an MIT study released last year estimated that back in 2005, significant improvements had been made to the air quality back then, but the country still lost more than $100 billion in labor and healthcare costs because of air pollution. So let's get more now from CNN's David McKenzie live from Beijing. David, what exactly is causing this heavy pollution north of you in Harbin?
Well, the government, Pauline, is saying that it's immediately caused by the turning on of the coal-powered heating system for Harbin. It's a pretty uniquely Chinese thing that when the government decides you'll get your heat, you get your heat. And the further north you are, the earlier they turn on the heating systems. That initially was what the government said. Now they've kind of dialed back on that a bit, saying that it might also be the crops that are being harvested using fire at this time, as well as maybe local pressure points of the weather system. Though what is clear is that it's been an awful period of pollution in Harbin, the city of some 10 million people, brought to a standstill. Schools closed, airports shut down, flights cancelled, as well as the highways in and out of town stopped. People describing how they cannot even see the hand in front of their face. So terrible pollution, and it's just as you describe, a very major economic impact on China, just with all of that economic activity ground to a halt because of the pollution factor. But then there's also obviously the long-term issue of health impact on China. No one really knows what this long-term pollution will have on the overall health sector. Certainly, a recent study said it could take 3 to 4 years off people's lives because of living through this kind of smog. Pauline?
Yeah, and of course, as we just touched on, the UN for the very first time has said that outdoor air pollution is classified as a carcinogenic. So they have actually set that in stone and made that a very concrete statement just last week. Now, David, even though the government is sort of changing its explanation of where this pollution is coming from, we do know that coal-fired plants that produce heat for the population is very polluting. Is the government doing anything to try to clean up the pollution the next couple of days?
Next couple of days, yes, they can have some short-term solutions. They'll pull government vehicles off the streets. They will stop some of the most polluting factories around Harbin. There are two scenarios here. One is the short-term scenario. The government has set up, also here in Beijing, a kind of rapid response system to alert people when the pollution is really bad, to pull cars off the street with certain registration numbers, as well as to look around the cities to those highly polluting factories and order them to be shut down. That's a short-term solution when bad smog hits. The long-term issue is more problematic, of course. China is looking to move away from its dependence on coal, just enormous consumer of coal here in China for heating and for power generation. The long-term outlook, though, is not great. China, to get to its own emission standard or smog standard, wants to get to that in 2020. To get to the WHO, the World Health Organization standard, it will take to 2050. So, you know, many decades could go by before we could see a real solution to this problem. At this time, though, it's a real headache for the government, who really, as the Communist Party, look at stability over everything else. And there's a great deal of social dissatisfaction and anger with the level of pollution that people, particularly in the north and northeast, are having to deal with.
Yeah, and we also see that anger on social media in China. David, thank you very much. David McKenzie there live from Beijing, where it's not looking so clear in the background either. And Nina, I can tell you here in Hong Kong, when you look out the windows, it's quite smoggy with our own dose of pollution as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that also comes from factories in China as well, doesn't it, on the other side of the water. Let's turn attention towards Australia now, though, because bushfires are sweeping across the country's most populated state, and the situation is expected to intensify from here on. More than 1,000 firefighters are currently battling dozens of blazes in New South Wales. Many of them still remain out of control. Officials say that there are fears that these blazes could soon merge together to make what's called a mega or super fire. The fires are getting closer to Sydney. As you can see, the smoke is already blanketing the skies there. Authorities say that the hot and dry weather combined with high winds contributed to destroying an area roughly the size of Los Angeles. And those conditions are expected to get even worse on Wednesday. Well, authorities have issued a state of emergency here, and that's been giving firefighters and the police the authority to order evacuations and also to decide to cut off power. Also, the economic fallout is growing by the day. Insurance claims are now soaring. Losses stand at around about $93 million and climbing. Our Robin Kerner is live from Winmalee in the Blue Mountains, and it's a story she's been following for a couple of days now in various parts of the region. Is it getting presumably worse, Robin? What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, authorities are very concerned about Wednesday in particular, where forecasts are suggesting that the temperatures will rise, become much hotter, the winds will become gustier, more erratic, and all of those together can fuel these fires that are already raging out of control. And they are concerned that more scenes like this will be repeated. Just take a look where I am. This is one street, and 40 homes were razed to the ground here by one of these fires. Devastating and fast. It just swept through the street in 50 minutes and literally flattening these houses in its path. We spoke to some residents a little bit earlier. They say they could really rescue nothing. Just about everything they owned had been destroyed. So this is a very personal and very dangerous time for people in this area, because the authorities don't want these scenes to be repeated, but they say they're fully aware that the potential for these fires to get much worse is there, that many more homes could be destroyed, and there's obviously that real concern that there could be loss of life. So some very serious times here in the next 24 hours as authorities battle these blazes, but they say they're fighting a monster fire on all fronts, a fire that has already burnt land the size of the city of Los Angeles. So this is an awesome challenge for authorities here on the ground.
And obviously it's very close to Sydney.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very huge area, and I think although Sydney is under threat, according to the authorities, it is more about those outer suburbs, the perimeters of Sydney that border some of this bushland. I think in terms of a threat to the actual metropolis of Sydney, that is probably unlikely. Firefighters are talking to me about. What they say they are very worried about are these villages or these towns, these hamlets that are surrounded by bushland, as you can see behind me. And so they're really issuing strict warnings. They're urging people to evacuate if they need to, and they say they need to evacuate now or early tomorrow morning. And they're also they've shut down schools. They want families to be together, and there really is a very deep seriousness. I've spoken to a number of firefighters here, and you get the sense that they've never seen anything like this combination of all these weather factors combined with the terrain in this area. It's very mountainous. There are lots of valleys, gullies, and they're finding many of these areas inaccessible, which is why these fires are raging uncontrollably, and they really are struggling to contain them. One way they're containing them is to try and do back burning, essentially controlled fires to try and stay ahead of these uncontrolled blazes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because of course, remember, Nina, that with these winds that are gusting around, often embers sort of get carried on these winds, so these fires sort of multiply as the wind speeds pick up. So some very serious times facing this region in the next 24 hours.
OK, Robin Kerno there, live from Wimberley in the Blue Mountains. Thanks so much for bringing us the latest there on those deadly fires. Morning.
One of the most closed-off, secretive countries in the world is now opening its arms to foreign investment. Coming up, the businesses moving in, the money they're investing, and what it will take for Myanmar to modernize.
Hyundai believes this is where your inspirations set you free. Hyundai makes every drive brilliant. Live brilliant. Hyundai.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson. Quest means business. Arm & Paul. It's your new evening lineup tonight on CNN.
Aiming for gold. Join a global journey that ends at the Sochi Games. This month, get into the mindset of Olympic hockey players.
It's a different type of feeling. You can speak your native language all the time.
And
it was tough today.
it's extremely hard. Training for skiing in the summer. Aiming for gold. Thursday on CNN in association with Russian Railways.
Innovators, influencers, they've reached the top and are today's leading women. Inspiring individuals sharing their insights on CNN. This month,
don't try and pretend to do something else.
Just be yourself. Helen Clark of the UN and Eva Chen of Trend Micro share how they have followed this seemingly simple advice in their own careers. Leading Women, Wednesday on CNN. In association with Omega.
Hello and welcome back. Well, the leader of Myanmar's democracy movement is getting a major honour today, 23 years after she actually won it in the first place. Aung San Suu Kyi will be presented with the European Parliament's top human rights award, the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. She was named as the winner back in 1990, but couldn't accept it because she was under house arrest inside Myanmar at the time.
Well, all this week we are focusing on the transformation of Myanmar. Political reforms are gradually overcoming years of international mistrust of the country formerly known as Burma, and it's becoming more integrated into the global economy. Over the weekend, a gas pipeline between China and Myanmar went into full operation. The project was 3 years in the making. The pipeline is expected to deliver 12 billion cubic meters of natural gas every year from Myanmar's offshore fields to southwest China. A major theme of our special coverage from Myanmar is how the country is welcoming business after decades of seclusion. More and more companies are looking to invest in this frontier market. CNN's Jim Bolden shows us some of the risks and rewards that could come with that investment.
Ford auto dealerships open all the time, but not in Yangon, Myanmar. Ford says it's the first authorized dealership in the country.
I'd like to thank the government of Myanmar.
Nissan is also pushing into the country. It's pledged to build a factory.
This is a country with 60 million people, which has practically no car industry, which is importing mainly used car.
Nissan plans to create 300 jobs on the 80-acre site, which could produce up to 10,000 autos a year. But it's a mere toe in the water for such a global player in a country where few can currently afford a new car.
The first investments and the first operations are going to be limited because of this, but we think it's going to move very fast. It reminds me a little bit the way the Chinese market was 20 years ago.
Cars are far from all that's lacking in a country emerging from decades of Western sanctions after a transition from military rule. Myanmar is one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia, and consultants McKinsey & Co. say modernization will take years and hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. So some companies are passing on Myanmar, for now at least, which could jeopardize its transformation.
They look, they listen, they learn, and then they leave. And so there is a concern that actually it won't happen, that people are just turning up, looking, investigating the country, saying really it's too early or it's not worth it.
Why? Well, Myanmar's infrastructure is so far behind its neighbors, and it's attempting economic transformation, ethnic peace, and political reform all at the same time. Myanmar is a resource-rich country, but while oil and gas is a key component of a resurgent economy, it doesn't create a lot of jobs. What does? Well, tourism and manufacturing, garments in particular.
Garments used to be a major export of Myanmar. That's likely to resume, and one would hope that the conditions are going to be monitored.
Ironically, if Myanmar's transformation is a success, it might only be a short-term low-cost center for garments.
A number of Chinese companies are debating, should we be moving some of our garment manufacturing that we currently do in China, should we be moving it to Myanmar, or should we be actually saying let's move it straight to Africa where there's a long-term demographic benefit?
Most of Myanmar's people still rely solely on agriculture, so the country will likely need to see mass migration to cities, some 10 million people, to take jobs that will grow the economy, cities not yet modernized or even built. Jim Bolden, CNN, London.
And later in this show, Paula Newton visits the country's former capital. We'll get a look at some of Yangon's colonial gems and their place in Burmese history. World Business Today will be back after this short break.
ready for this? Get ready for the adventure of a lifetime in Cambodia, the Kingdom of Wonder.
It's life in the fast lane, in the cars, and off the track. Stay ahead of the pack with The Circuit on CNN. Track the business behind the billions fueling the sport. And keep up with Formula One, the drivers, and its legends. This weekend, get the latest news and standings from India on The Circuit with CNN. All weekend in world sports, in association with DHL. CNN Heroes honors people who don't ask for honors. They just want to change the world. Now you can vote for the CNN Hero of the Year. Go to cnnheroes.com. Vote once a day, every day, and honor these amazing people. Vote today.
Information is knowledge, information is power, information is security. And I strongly believe our viewers, people all over the world, have real questions of their own. They want to know what's happening in their world, what it means to them, how it'll affect them. And so it's really up to us, once we get elected officials or anybody in public positions in front of us, to keep up the persistence to get out of them really what we're searching for.
Christiane Amanpour, asking questions that help you make sense of the world. Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
I'm Paula Hancock's in Seoul, and this is CNN.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Business Today on CNN. Let's check in on the main stock markets here in Europe. They've been trading for about an hour and 31 minutes precisely, as you can see. Again, it mirrors the picture that we saw yesterday, a case of 2 up and 2 down. Markets are expected to be rather quiet, volumes pretty light until, of course, we get the big thing that's coming out later on today, and that's the belated release of the US jobs data on the month of September. London could, if it carries on with this kind of trajectory, make it 9 winning sessions in a row. Might point out, despite the lacklustre performance today, Pauline, it's hard to imagine that these markets are currently hovering near 5-year highs.
Well, Nina, here in the Asia-Pacific region, we had a mixed picture as well. Take a look at Sydney. It ended up 0.4%. Australia's largest mining company, BHP Billiton, rose 2.33% today. It raised its outlook for iron ore production for the fiscal year for 2014, and this follows a jump in output for the first quarter. Now, the indices in China, here in Hong Kong and in Shanghai, they ended the session down partly because of the property sector weighing down those indices. It showed that new home prices in more than 60 major cities in China rose for the month of September year on year, which shows that there is concern with the housing property, as it is a property bubble, and concern that the measures that Beijing is taking to rein in those prices are not quite working as well as they'd like. Let's take a look at how U.S. markets are doing in futures. And as you can see, they're pretty much sitting on the fence right now ahead of the jobs report that Nina had just mentioned. Investors are being cautious as we wait for the opening bell, and we're not seeing a lot of movement in these indices. In addition to the September non-farm payroll numbers, we'll also get another batch of corporate earnings reports. Some of today's companies include Delta and Lockheed Martin. Investors are also reacting to Netflix's 10% gain in after-hours trading, Nina.
Well, Pauline, Apple has something that it wants the rest of us to see, something new perhaps, because it's invited selected guests to an unveiling later today. Like its last September invite, when it showed off the new iPhone 5S and also 5C models, this one has come with another one of those cryptic messages that Apple loves to give out, saying, quote, "We still have a lot to cover." Apple is notoriously tight-lipped about these kind of events, but fans love to speculate, don't they? So let's have a quick look at what could be in store and up Apple's sleeve. Well, many people are expecting this to be the unveiling of the iPad 5 or perhaps even a second iPad mini. The 5th generation of iPads is rumoured to be lighter and thinner, also with an improved camera. The new mini, if indeed that is what is released, could also be in for a display upgrade. So for people who are interested in that, that could be what you might want to see. Well, they may not be the only stars of the show, though, because some people are also saying that Apple could be planning to launch an upgrade to its MacBook Pro with a better battery life here. We're talking about their laptops rather than tablet computer here. And although the OS X Mavericks was technically unveiled at an event earlier on this year, some say that it's likely we could learn more about the new desktop software upgrade that Apple launched, as I was saying before. That was a few months ago, but we could learn more. Personally, we all know what we want from something that Apple puts out. I myself wouldn't mind an iPad mini. My producer wouldn't mind one of those MacBook Pros. So who knows? Fingers crossed, Pauline.
Yeah, I know. I'm always borrowing my husband's iPad, and he keeps telling me, get your own, get your own. So maybe I'll splurge for one of those iPad minis. But I wonder what they mean with that teaser of we still have a lot to cover, because some of the blogs are saying maybe it's something with the iPad cover and maybe it'll have a keyboard in it. We'll find out in about 9 hours from now. Well, from Apple's mystery events to Google's idea machine, Google X, it's the search giant's innovation laboratory, which works on new tech projects out of an undisclosed location in San Francisco. Google X is the lab that developed the Google Glass, the personal computer designed to be mounted on your head through a pair of glasses. Now, Google X is also the brain behind the company's self-driving car. It's already started test driving them in the states of Nevada and California. Our Poppy Harlow sat down with Google X's vice president, Megan Smith, and asked her about the lab's upcoming projects.
We know Google X for quote-unquote moonshot technologies, right? And we don't know a lot of the things that are happening in the secret Google X lab. We know some of them that have come out. The driverless car, I think you said it's been driven 500,000 miles.
Yes, 500,000
Google Glass. How do you say, yes, that's a concept, we're just going to try? Or do you never say no? Do you say, why not?
I think we do a lot of why not. We also have two other public projects, Project Loon, which is the balloons in the stratosphere to bring the internet to the edges, and also a group called Makani that's doing kite-based windmills. Wind is much stronger, much higher. Can we get better efficiency out of high wind production? So I think it's sort of in that same spirit of Elon Musk, where you're looking at basic physics and saying, is this physically possible? Not what people are saying about whether it's possible or not, but what's the math and science behind whether something is possible? And really, people in our world are driven by how can we make an impact on the world that would make a difference? What would be really helpful for humanity? What would be better for the environment? And are there technologies that are on the horizon? They sound like science fiction, but we actually, could bring them to bear.
Have you ever been told, no, you can't try that, not going to work?
Yeah, in lots of cases people say that, but you kind of have to go around it. You find teammates, go find other people that you can work with.
Google X's Megan Smith mentioned there, speaking with Poppy Harlow, teamwork does go quite a long way. Here in Europe, the European Space Agency is actually joining forces with industry leaders to try and develop 3D printing technology in a hope that one day it may further space travel. Neil Curry shows us how.
From a model of a car engine to the more controversial plastic gun, 3D printers have revolutionized the way we make things.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, the European Space Agency has unveiled a plan to print parts out of metal.
Maze is an exciting project. It's just started this year. It's going to be a 5-year project that's going to look at additive manufacturing of metal products. We're going to make the world's best quality metal components for a whole range of different sectors.
The project is a joint venture between the ESA and industry. Their aim is to produce metal components that are lighter and stronger, as they'll be made out of one piece of metal without welding or bolting.
The sectors of industry that I can see this being used in, today it's already being used actually in the medical sector. So there are implants being made for implanting hips, for example, made in titanium using these technologies. The next adopters are likely to be space, defense and aerospace.
printers work in the same way as current versions using plastic that's laid down to build up the finished product. With these printers, molten metal is used instead. It's hoped that the technology could be used to make cars and planes, even building parts in outer space.
We're hoping to be able to eventually print simple parts that can be used for astronauts for future missions to the Moon or to Mars as well.
But the ESA knows there are still several key challenges to overcome.
These liquid metals are prone to oxidation, so you need to make sure that your chamber has no oxygen in it whatsoever. Some of the metal powders that we buy from powder producers, they may contain inside them very small bubbles of gas, which is inherent to that process. And if you bring in those gas bubbles into your parts, that could potentially be a crack later on. So there's a whole range of limitations which we're very open and honest and transparent about.
Until these are solved, we'll have to wait a while longer before 3D printing enters the metal age. Neil Curry, CNN, London.
And pretty soon we can print out our own coffee cups. Well, Starbucks is under fire over how much it's charging its customers in China. State-run media say that Starbucks coffee in China actually costs more than in other markets. A tall latte, for example, is the equivalent of $4.40 in China. Compare this to $3.20 in the U.S. city of Chicago. Now, the Starbucks executive who oversees China upholds this pricing. John Culver told the Financial Times, "This issue right now does not warrant me spending a special trip going to China." Starbucks is the latest international company to be hit with criticism from China. Now, back in March, state media launched a campaign against Apple's warranty and customer services in the country. And Nina, we thought we'd do a comparison because I have noticed that the prices are different from when I traveled to the U.S. and here in Hong Kong. And we do have a Starbucks behind our newsroom here in Quarry Bay. And the costs of a tall latte or a medium at Starbucks behind our office is 31 Hong Kong dollars, which is equivalent to about $4 US. So that is more than what I pay when I go back to the US. What about you in London?
Yeah, it's pretty similar, I must say, and I think they've also put their prices up. My colleague went to have a quick coffee run about an hour or so ago and found out that it was about £2.15, which in dollar terms is $3.40. So again, not quite as expensive as things in Hong Kong, although Hong Kong's one of the world's most expensive cities, but still, we're talking London and Hong Kong, and it's still less than China. These are some of the most expensive cities anywhere in the world. So the only answer to that is brew your own, which is why I've got my own coffee on set. Now, just after the break, a very close call for two 747 jumbo jets that were flying over Scotland earlier in the week. We bring you the details of these heart-stopping moments for passengers. That's coming up next.
It's a new dawn in Africa, and our enormous potential and opportunities are being harnessed by one bank. UBA, United Bank for Africa, stands strong as the bank of choice for Africans and Africa-related businesses, uniting African people and businesses with the world. So, make the wise choice today. Bank with UBA, Africa's global bank.
Next time you travel, stay in a CNN partner hotel.
Aiming for gold. Join a global journey that ends at the Sochi Games. This month, get into the mindset of Olympic hockey players.
It's a different type of feeling that you can speak your native language all the time.
And
It was tough today.
It's extremely hard.
training for skiing in the summer. Aiming for gold. Thursday on CNN in association with Russian Railways.
Innovators, influencers, they've reached the top and are today's leading women. Inspiring individuals sharing their insights on CNN. This month,
don't try and pretend to do something else.
Just be yourself. Helen Clark of the UN and Eva Chen of Trend Micro share how they have followed this seemingly simple advice in their own careers. Leading Women, Wednesday on CNN. In association with Omega.
Let's return to a story we're covering for you earlier on World Business Today, namely the raging wildfires currently underway in Australia. A cold front is now approaching New South Wales. Samantha Moore is live at the CNN International Weather Centre with more on what this means for the scorched region. Hi there, Samantha.
Hi there, Nina. Yeah, we are getting in some showers. We've been getting them all day long and into the evening now, off and on. It's not going to be the good soaking rain we need. I think the radar is overplaying it a little bit here, but still at this point we'll take every drop of moisture we can get. 22 degrees, the temperature is cooler today than the last few days, and the winds out of the northeast at 15, and they'll be picking up as we head into the next 48 hours, unfortunately. So here's Sydney. Here is the largest of the fires in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, and that one's the State Mine Fire. Now merging with the Mount Victoria fire, and they have been worried about this for a couple of days as it continues to expand. The blaze continues to expand. It will put more people at risk, especially where it's a little more populated here to the south of the fires. It continues to consume all of this woodlands and some houses. You know, we've had more than 200 homes already destroyed, 100 million in insurance claims likely, and already more than 850 claims totaling $93 million. And Australia bushfires have cost $1.6 billion in the last 10 years. And of course, many of these numbers we do anticipate to go up as these fires continue to burn out of control. Haven't had much rain. That's part of the problem. Many of these areas seeing less than half their average annual rainfall, so they are parched, and then you get the winds really picking up here. Look at this. Canberra will see those winds up around 70 as we head into Wednesday midday. Sydney will have some very gusty winds as well. So all across the Blue Mountains, gusty winds ahead of this front. Now, once the front does move through, we should start to see some improvement, but it's still going to be another 2 days, and the firefighters are going to try to stay ahead of these shifting winds, but it is going to be a really difficult task. And once the front moves through, we'll see some cooler temperatures here in Sydney, and of course the firefighters will appreciate that slight cooling trend as well. But Nina, they certainly have their work cut out for them.
They certainly do. Samantha Moore, the CNN International Weather Centre, thanks so much for that there, bringing us the latest, meteorologically speaking, on what's going on in Australia. Now, changing tack, British investigators say a case of severe pilot confusion was the likely cause of two jumbo jets coming dangerously close to each other over Scotland this past June. Bonnie Marsh has more on what was a pretty close call.
Mid-air over Scotland, two 747 jumbo jets carrying up to 1,000 passengers are on a path to collide. And British investigators say it's because the pilots didn't follow the instructions from air traffic control.
This is very hard to explain because it appears that two airplanes with two pilots in each airplane, everybody got it wrong initially.
The problem started when one plane, Jet 2, asked the control tower for clearance to climb in altitude. It was cleared, but that put it at the same altitude as another plane, Jet 1. The two planes were now on a converging path and moving closer by the second. The controller, realizing that, stepped in to prevent a collision.
He gave instructions to the pilot on the right to go to the right and on the left to go to the left. The conclusion of the British investigators was that each pilot did what the other pilot was instructed to do, and the planes turned toward each other.
At their closest point, the two planes were about 3 miles apart horizontally and 100 feet vertically. That's under the minimum separation requirement.
We have several layers of protection, and we got down to some of the last ones here. The pilot saw the other airplane and said so, and the collision avoidance system activated properly.
The plane's automatic alarms alerted the pilots, and they corrected their paths. Former FAA accident investigator Stephen Wallace says it's rare 4 pilots get the instructions so wrong. But the safety nets kicked in, and that, he says, should give comfort to airline passengers. He adds, there hasn't been a collision between U.S. airliners since 1978. Renee Marsh, CNN, Washington.
Let's get a check on the price of oil right now, namely NYMEX. The price of U.S. crude has fallen below $100 a barrel for the very first time since early July. It is currently trading at $98.88 a barrel, down 34 cents. Now, the U.S. government showed that oil stockpiles have built up in recent weeks, a sign of weaker than expected consumption. And as you can see from this chart, there's been a lot of fluctuation in NYMEX crude prices since the month of July. And it currently stands, as I mentioned, just under $99 a barrel. And keep in mind, this part of the graph is during the government shutdown, those 16 days when many, including Standard & Poor's, had said that this shutdown is going to affect growth in the U.S. in the fourth quarter. Nina.
Well, speaking of oil, Pauline, Brazil has sold the production rights to its largest oil discovery. 4 energy giants secured the rights to develop the huge Libra oil field in a joint bid. Well, the 4 that were successful include China's CNOOC, as well as CNPC here, Royal Dutch Shell over there, and France's Total. Together, they make up a group led by state-run firm Petrobras. As Shasta Darlington reports now, these kind of companies didn't have all that much competition, but there was plenty of opposition to the deal itself.
Brazil auctioned off a giant offshore oil block despite massive protests and lackluster interest from companies that meant only a single consortium put in a bid. Now, that group included European majors Shell and Total, as well as Brazil's own Petrobras and 2 Chinese companies. They now own the rights to develop Libra, considered one of the most promising fields in the world today. Now, even before the auction started, the Brazilian government had sent in more than 1,000 army troops and police to cordon off the hotel in Rio de Janeiro where the auction took place. There were clashes between protesters and police. Tear gas was fired. Protesters attacked parked cars and tried to knock down metal barricades. This was the first auction under new rules, which actually give more control over the reserves to both the government and the state-run company Petrobras. Under these rules, Petrobras is required to hold at least a 30% stake in any consortium that participates in these auctions. Now, while only one group did participate in the end, there is some good news for the government, and that is that it will take home a $7 billion signing fee, and the consortium will have to invest $185 billion over the 35 years of the concession. Shasta Darlington, CNN, Sao Paulo.
Let's head back towards this part of the planet and take a look at the European stock markets before we bid you goodbye for this hour of WBT. Markets are expected to be rather quiet in this part of the world until we get that key release of the monthly US jobs figures, which will happen later on Tuesday. They could be skewed, of course, by the government shutdown that delayed them by a couple of weeks. But still, that is the big thing that investors are looking forward to today.
Yeah, absolutely, here in the Asia-Pacific region as well, Nina. And we also got housing data out of China, which pushed Shanghai and Hong Kong lower. The main Aussie benchmark reached a new 5-year high as the heavyweight BHP Billiton raised its iron ore production guidance for fiscal year 2014, Nina.
Well, Pauline, as Myanmar opens up for business, some of the country's iconic structures are coming under threat. Still to come on the show, how one group is trying to keep this building and other ones like it from meeting a bulldozer.
This week on Inside Africa.
Do you ever consider when you're on the road that the tyres on which you're riding could have originated right here in Africa? I'm Errol Barnett, Inside Africa, and this week's show is all about rubber and the process of transformation, taking it from a seed in the ground to a wheel on the road.
Inside Africa, Wednesday only on CNN. In association with Zenith Bank. It's life in the fast lane, in the cars, and off the track. Stay ahead of the pack with The Circuit on CNN. Track the business behind the billions fueling the sport. And keep up with Formula One, the drivers, and its legends. This weekend, get the latest news and standings from India on The Circuit with CNN. All weekend in world sport, in association with DHL.
this week, CNN's On the Road series will be bringing you a greater insight into the customs and cultures of Myanmar. From the famous pagodas to the treasures of Mandalay, Paula Newton explores the places, the people, and the passions unique to this largely unexplored Southeast Asian nation. Today, she looks at efforts to preserve the past in Yangon.
Set on a sprawling estate in central Yangon, the Secretariat has been empty for a few years, but with its elegant lines and refined style, it's as if it's standing at attention, ready for its next chapter. Its last was tumultuous.
So this room is a special place and significance in Burmese history.
Absolutely, it's one of the most important spaces in Burmese history, or places in Burmese history. In 1947, July of 1947, Burma was almost independent. And the man who had led the independence movement, General Aung San, was already the head of the cabinet that was beginning to govern the country. And he was meeting here one morning with his cabinet when gunmen came through that door and shot him and then shot almost all of his colleagues. So on the eve of independence in Burma, Burma lost many of its top leaders and most capable leaders.
General Aung San is the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, Myanmar's Nobel laureate and former political prisoner, a woman who, like her father, fought for her country's freedom. And with her release from house arrest almost 3 years ago, she rejoined the political process as the government moved ahead with reforms. Her father lost his life in this very room, one of the countless reasons why the Secretariat will now, hopefully, be well preserved.
Which is revolutionary in and of itself. I think just a couple of years ago, this was not on the agenda at all. And I think we were in real danger. And a senior government official said to me at the time that if we hadn't intervened when we did a year and a half ago, there was a good chance that all of these old buildings might have been knocked down.
In fact, sprawled throughout central Yangon are dozens of colonial-era buildings. This city, known in those times as Rangoon, was once a bustling colonial crossroads. Its architectural heritage is rich. And in future, there may be no better monument to the political rebirth of Myanmar than the Secretariat, restored to former glory and in service to future generations. Paula Newton, CNN, Yangon.
Our On the Road Myanmar series continues tomorrow. After 60 years of isolation, Myanmar offers travelers a virtually unspoiled landscape. Paula explores how the country is transforming itself into a must-see tourist destination.
Absolutely fascinating series, isn't it, that one? Well, that's it for this early edition of World Business Today. Pauline and myself will be back in 4 hours' time with Maggie Lake for the opening bell on Wall Street. In the meantime, CNN Newsroom is next.
In the business of bringing joy, Kirloskar goes much beyond enriching lives.
Inside the world of horse racing with CNN's Winning Post this month.
We're in Paris for the most sought-after prize on the racing calendar, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe.
Winning Post, Thursday on CNN, in association with Longines. CNN's original series, Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, South Africa. Can a country once torn apart by racial division bring communities back together?
Are these good times for South Africa?
South Africans say yes.
I think it's one of the most mixed societies I've ever seen.
When you look at what's happened here, it's hard to not look at South Africa as a beacon of some kind of hope.
Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, South Africa, only on CNN.
I'm Jim Bolden in London. This is CNN.